How to get over an ex who cheated on you. That's a hard one. That's one that I had to deal with a few times over in my last relationship. And I thought maybe today I could talk about what happened in that relationship, what led up to the cheating, what happened after the cheating multiple times, and how I moved on from it. I am the type of person who likes being in a relationship. I like being close to somebody. I like being intimate and sharing the most vulnerable parts of myself with somebody. I know that's not how everybody is. I definitely know that after doing this channel and researching and learning about what different people feel, but for me, I've always liked the idea of being in a relationship. Ever since I was a little kid, that was like the big dream for me, was to be in a relationship with somebody, having a best friend. And that's probably why I don't get into a lot of relationships. I don't really date a lot of people, because I want to know before I get involved with somebody that they actually care, that this is going to be something meaningful. I'm not here for your one-night stands. I'm not here for those flings, the summer flings and all that stuff. I'm here to be serious. When I met my ex, I was still sort of recovering from the last relationship. I've only really had two major relationships, my ex and the ex before that in my life. And so I was hopeful. I was feeling like I mostly got over the last one. I was the one who decided to break it off. It was bad terms. It was very clear it wasn't a good relationship. So I did my recuperating. I dated a few people, and then I came across my ex, or he came across me, however you want to say it. So I was hopeful, and I maybe overlooked some things that I probably shouldn't have overlooked, but we had conversations in the beginning. It felt like a friendship, and in fact, I was only looking for a friendship. I really only wanted to test the waters and get to know people and, you know, just see what life had to offer. I wasn't really looking for a relationship, even though that's the type of thing that I'm always looking for. That was not my goal when I met my ex. However, my ex was very persuasive and very motivated and pursuant of me, and, you know, just like anybody, showered me with compliments and showered me with gifts and whatnot in the beginning because he wanted a relationship. And eventually I kind of just let down my guard and said, okay, you know what, let's call this dating or something, or like whatever. It doesn't have to mean anything. We started like seeing each other in November 2009. We weren't an official thing until then. We were talking before a little bit, but as I said, he was pursuant, so that's when we kind of officially became partners. And honestly, from that point forward, like, to me, things felt pretty good. We would meet every night and I'd hang out at his place, and I would sleep over, and it felt natural. It didn't feel like I was being pushed into anything. It felt great. And eventually, as time rolled on, we moved in together, and, you know, there were speed bumps, believe me. There were speed bumps, and we had arguments, but because this was the beginning of a relationship, I kind of like looked past it, and I figured it's not that big of a deal. You know, maybe it's just today. Maybe it's my mood. Maybe it's his mood. We'll figure this out, was my general attitude. Again, remember, I like to be in a relationship, so for me, this was heading all in the right direction. It was just like positive after positive after positive, maybe a few negatives sprinkled in here and there. Over time, though, I think the stress of living together, and you'll know this if you ever moved in with your lover, that there's an adjustment period, and there's a lot of stress around living together because all of these things that you didn't know about them start to come out when you have to interact with them daily, and you have to find ways to compromise about the different ways that you like to live your lives. And that was something that showed up big time when we moved in together, and it wasn't something we were very good at resolving, to be frank. Even with these issues, though, I still felt good. I felt like, whatever, like, this is normal. This is what happens in relationships. You have issues, some of them you resolve, some of them you don't resolve, and that's okay. That's a normal relationship. And I still feel that way today. When I look back on those earlier years, I feel like, okay, whatever, that's a relationship. I don't think that's how my ex felt, though, and truthfully, you know, there were a lot of my needs that were not getting met, and we were having arguments that got bigger and bigger, but it was what it was to me. He didn't feel the same way. There was a big problem, though, and the big problem was that he was not communicating to me the way that he was feeling, so I had no way to know that these were issues. In fact, in 2012, which was about 3 years after we had first gotten together and first really solidified ourselves as in a relationship, he made a fake account unbeknownst to me, and that fake account would be used later. I don't remember this time very well because we had a long relationship and a lot was going on, but October 4th of that same year, 2012, he sent me an email. Sometimes we communicated in email when things were really rough and it was hard to say things out loud, and I was okay with that. But he sent me an email saying that he was not happy with the way the relationship was going. He felt like he was unloved. He felt like he wasn't getting enough physical affection, which was very strange because he was the one that was withdrawing physical affection from me as far as I perceived everything to be, so that was weird. But he was basically just voicing these concerns, which, like, good, finally, you're telling me how you feel. Let's have that conversation. That was kind of my approach to it. And that was basically my response. I sent an email back and I said, like, okay, I'm sorry that you feel this way. I don't know, like, I feel bad. And I think I explained some stuff about my past, which I think he already knew, but, you know, I come from a divorced family. Relationships can be hard for me for a lot of different reasons. If you go through my channel, you'll learn some of the reasons. And so I probably laid that out for him and said, like, listen, this is where I'm coming from. I apologize. Let's see what we can do to make this better in general. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but the very next day he cheated on me. For me, our relationship just continued on as usual. I had no idea that he had cheated. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary to me, maybe because I was used to not having physical affection. And so our relationship continued. It had no effect on me until January of the next year. I found out I was home alone and something happened that I won't get into the details of, but I basically figured out that he had cheated on me back in 2012. I was devastated. I was hurt. I felt lost. I felt like a little child. I had no idea where to turn. Who could I even say this to? What did it mean if I said it to somebody? It was horrible, and in a way, thank God I was alone, because I don't know how I would have handled it if I found out with him there. So let's talk about how I handled it, because if you've just been cheated on, you may go through similar thoughts. For one thing, I searched online to see like what apartments were available if I needed to move out. Like, I needed to think immediately, what are my options here if this needs to be a reality? It felt very immediate, it felt scary, and it felt like I might have to be making some really quick decisions that I didn't want to have to make, but I kind of did have to make because of somebody else's actions. So I was frantically looking online, like, what are my options here? In incognito mode, of course, because I didn't want anybody to know that I was doing anything. It felt like I had this giant secret, this giant weight that fell in my chest and sat there, sunk inside of me. And it's still really kind of there in some ways. I still have that feeling of, what just happened to me? Because remember, I came from a home of divorce, and that was a big deal for me, especially because I went through it pretty much as a child, age 8 to 13 approximately. I always say that. It was a broad spectrum of age for the divorce, but that was hard, and that was painful as a kid, and so to be cheated on, it just took all of that and brought it back into my memory. But also in the middle of my total freak out here, I was also thinking like, okay, but what does this mean? Why did he do this? Why am I trust me, I went over it like 100 times to make sure I was seeing it right and understanding the picture correctly. But I also was like, okay, but why? Why would this happen? And I kind of remembered the old email that he had sent me about not feeling affectionate. And I'm like, well, it's true, we haven't been affectionate, so maybe that's the problem here. And I kind of had this thought in my head of like, well, let's see, maybe we can go to see a therapist, a couples therapist, and figure out what's going on and see if this is a relationship that can be saved, because I really didn't want to move out. I liked where I was living. I liked my relationship with him up until this point. I mean, like I said, it wasn't great. There were wishy-washy times, but it was a relationship in my mind that was normal. So I sat that night with the secret. I believe he came home that night, but I kind of like thought it through on my own. I meditated because I had just started getting into meditation, and that was probably the best thing for me in that moment, because I really needed to have a clear head and feel calm. And in my heart, I was not ready to let the relationship go. I felt like we could still work on things. But then there was also the matter of like, now what? Because he has to know that I know. I'm not going to keep this secret. That is crazy. This needs to be communicated, that I know what happened. Because otherwise we're not going to therapy together. I didn't want that to come out in therapy. I wanted to be upfront and real about it. So I waited until a time where my ex couldn't really avoid me, and I let him know that I had discovered he was cheating, and he at first denied it, but then he kind of backed down after I said, like, I know, I have proof that you were cheating. And that was awkward. That was weird. And then, if I remember correctly, I got the silent treatment for a day while he thought about things or whatever. And I kind of thought, like, okay, whatever. It's a big deal. It sucks. I am kind of the victim here in this situation, but I also felt like, well, this is just difficult for anybody, so let me give him his space. And what he did was he emailed me back. I think he emailed me back. I'd have to check the records on that one, but somehow we communicated, and he said, like, okay, I'm willing to do the therapy. So I felt okay. I felt like, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to figure this out. But we went into therapy, and it was a little awkward, but I am into psychology. I'm into all this stuff, so it wasn't super awkward for me. And we started to discuss things, and we started to figure out, like, what happened. And, you know, it wasn't a secret that he wasn't feeling, like, appreciated. He wasn't feeling physical affection. So we discussed that, and we discussed maybe some ways that we weren't communicating very well with each other. And we started to learn to communicate a little bit better. I just checked the dates because I do have dates on all this stuff, and it was only 2 days later after we talked about him cheating on me that we went to see a therapist. So I felt good. It felt like, okay, you know what, he's committing to this. And actually, after we started seeing the therapist, I felt like things started to turn around a little bit. It felt like we had somebody else in our corner, and we were learning a little bit more about what was going on and maybe why it happened. And it felt like, okay, like, this is kind of like the ideal situation here, that maybe we can get back to the way things were, and maybe even better than the way things were, and have a good relationship. Things were going well, but then my ex totally took me out of the blue, shocked me when he proposed to me a month and a half later, and I was like, we're still in therapy for you cheating on me, which I only just discovered, and what? But in the moment of a proposal, you're kind of put on the spot. I was being filmed, and it was totally not in my comfort zone because I was in my pajamas. Anybody that knows me knows that I hate to not be seen like made up and like at least presentable, in my opinion. I know it's not that important, but anyway, it was important to me. So I was feeling on the spot, and I felt like, okay, well, I'm just going to say yes because I'm being filmed, and we can always discuss it if it's an issue and figure it out later. I felt like, okay, well, this is just a promise. This isn't like we're getting married. We'll figure it out. Well, from there, we just kind of moved forward. We kept going through therapy, and sometimes things felt really amazing, and sometimes things felt really crappy, and I felt like, well, why do things feel so crappy? And over time, like, we went to this therapist for a few years. I started to realize this therapist is not really helping us that much, and okay, he cheated on me, but I don't really feel like that was ever resolved. I feel like she was trying to push me to move past it, and that didn't feel right, and I don't think it was right. Sure enough, in January of the next year, 2014, he cheated on me again, and it was much more serious. I felt like I knew a little bit more details this time, and it was just like, how is this happening to me? How does somebody who recommits to a relationship, who wants to be my fiance, who wants to live with me forever, I mean, that's the promise of marriage, right, is cheating on me again? That was devastating. That was horrible. It was reliving everything that happened the first time, only it was more horrifying because we were trying to make it work, and I had trusted him, and now I really can't trust him. Now, I confronted my ex, of course, with the knowledge that he had cheated again, and his response was to try to break up with me, which this was starting to become a thing where he wanted to break up with me, and he would try to break up with me, and we discussed it with the therapist once, and I told the therapist, like, that's not really what I want, and we all agreed that it was okay to continue, so it wasn't like I was forcing him to stay in the relationship, but he wanted to break up again, and I was just at the point where I was like, what is this cop-out of we want to break up again? Like, just work on the issue. Let's figure this out. Like, you have more than enough patience in me. Why can't we just figure out what's going on here and why you feel this need to keep cheating? And keep in mind, I had never told a single person about his cheating other than the therapist. Never once. It was lipped, sealed. It was all in me, and I was holding that in, and I was doing that for the sake of our relationship. So we continued moving forward, and I know there are friends currently that I have who've told me, like, you're crazy for even continuing to do that, and maybe, I don't know, but I wanted the relationship to work, and so we continued forward. I'm rushing things a little bit here because the sun is going down, so we got to 2015, and we continued having fights. Like, things just continued getting worse, and he really wanted to break up, and so we jumped in with a new therapist because we stopped seeing the old therapist because of a fight. And we got to the new therapist, and I had hopes again, like, okay, this is a new therapist, maybe a therapist who knows better how to handle this situation. And not too far into the therapy, he decided, like, this is it, I'm breaking up with you for good. And he meant it, and he was not backing down this time. Well, during this time, I had asked him not to date anybody. Like, if you're gonna do anything here, I was having a hard time with it. It was clear, like, the therapist knew, everybody knew I was having a hard time with this. Just do me a favor and don't date somebody until we figure this out and we resolve this. And instead what he did was he stopped showing up to therapy and stopped showing up at home. We had gotten into therapy around September of that year, which was 2015. That's when he wanted to break up. And then it was around November, December-ish when he started not showing up at home. And eventually I learned that he was seeing somebody, and that's what was going on. So it felt like another betrayal, and it felt like the ultimate betrayal, because here we are, and 6-year relationship down the drain, all of this effort in trying to make it work, all of this effort in sacrificing of myself and the things that I wanted to try to make it work, and here we were, and he couldn't even give me the decency of breaking up on soft ground. So what did I do to move on from all of this? Because this was a lot. Believe me, it was a lot, and it was very hard, and I went through periods of feeling depressed. I went through the times on the floor crying and screaming. I went through the anger. I went through the thoughts of, like, wanting to kill him, and the thoughts of wanting to get back together and, like, just keep going on the path we were going. I went through all of it. It was hard. One thing that I did was I stopped taking it so personally, as if it was my personal failing that the relationship fell apart. And that was hard because I know that I'm the only person that I can control. And so I was always trying to find ways to change myself, to change my behavior so that this time we'll figure it out. You know, I was changing the therapist so that we could get the tools that we needed. And I do think that was a good move for a lot of different reasons. But I was also changing myself, and I was trying to be more affectionate. I was trying to calm myself. I was just doing everything that I could. I didn't see it coming from his end. And I think, like, realizing that, I had to understand that the cheating wasn't my fault. And if you've been cheated on, it's really not your fault. It's that person's insecurities about themselves or about the relationship or whatever that you probably couldn't have done very much about. I mean, unless you were making their life a living hell, and I'm pretty sure you weren't, then they have to own that some of that's on them. I also really had to stop comparing myself to these other people, because there were times when I was looking at these other people and I'm like, well, why did he choose them? Like, I didn't really see them as anything different from me or anything special, or I didn't really understand that, and it was really frustrating, and it wore away at my self-esteem. So I eventually, over time, had to stop, like, thinking that there was something different about the two of us, me and the other partners, or feeling like there was something inadequate about me, because there wasn't. What I really think it came down to was that I had to recognize that I did everything that I could in this relationship, and I tried to make it work as best as I could. I even allowed for cheating, and some might say that was a mistake. I don't think that was necessarily a mistake. It depends on how you want to look at things. Everybody has their own comfort level for this stuff. But I did what I could. Like, that's really what it comes down to. I did everything in my possibility to make this relationship work, and it didn't. It didn't. And I wasn't the one cheating. So to get down on myself wasn't going to help. Now, on the flip side, getting angry and frustrated and bitter, that's not really helping either. As much as it's good to express it, don't get me wrong. It's good to express how you're feeling, get angry, get sad, and go through it. That's part of the grieving process. But eventually, it's not good to hold on to for so long. You know, I still get bitter about all of it. It still makes no sense to me, and it still drives me crazy, but it's not eating up my life every day. It's going to eat up your life every day in the beginning. Believe me, that's okay. That's acceptable. That's your brain figuring it out. But eventually, you gotta let it pass and leave room for happier moments to come back into your life. So were you cheated on? Did any of this ring true for you? Does it sound like a situation you've been through? Do you have any questions for me? Because I never dreamed this was something that was going to happen to me, and it happened. And so I would have liked somebody to have questions to ask, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. Let me know your thoughts down below.